Star Wars 7 by 7 episode 2236. Today, the second half of my interview with Sarah Kuhn, the author of the Doctor Aphra audio drama. Punch it! Hey Rebel Rouser, I'm Alan Voivod, and this is Star Wars 7 by 7, your daily dose of Star Wars joy, and thank you so much for joining me for it. So, yesterday we shared the first half of the interview with Sarah Kuhn, who is the author of the Doctor Aphra audio drama that adapts and expands upon her story as depicted in the comics. And today I've got the other half. Just to refresh you about Sarah, she is the author of the popular Heroine Complex novels. That's heroine with an E. It's a series starring Asian American superheroes. She is also the author of a Japan set YA romantic comedy and a Batgirl Cassandra Cain graphic novel for DC. She's written assorted short fiction, non-fiction, and comics about geeks, aliens, romance, and Barbie. Yes, that Barbie. And you can visit her online at heroinecomplex.com. Again, heroine with an E. She is Sarah Kuhn on Twitter. That's Kuhn. And on this second half of the interview, we're going to talk about drawing from other genres to tell Star Wars stories. We're going to talk about the joy and challenge of writing for 000, that murderous protocol droid. We're going to talk about a few other things too, and I'm just very excited to share the rest of this interview with Sarah Kuhn with you. So without further ado, here is that back half of that interview with Sarah Kuhn, the author of the Doctor Aphra audio drama. I do want to circle back to something that you mentioned a little bit earlier about just Aphra's realization about wanting to be alive, like that she might actually want to be alive and that she was kind of lucky. And when you said it, in my head, the line from Hamilton that they repeat from time to time, "Look at how lucky we are to be alive right now," kept ringing in. And I wanted to ask you about external influences. When people talk about Star Wars stories, a lot of times what they say is that, Star Wars is terrific in general because it's not just self-referential, it also brings in outside influences and makes it unique through its own lens. And I wanted to ask you about your own external influences. What do you feel like you brought from outside the Star Wars galaxy into this story?
A couple things. I mentioned romance earlier, and I think I'm a big romance novel reader. And the books that I write, my original series, Heroine Complex, which is my Asian American superheroine series, those are kind of urban fantasy / paranormal romance. They sort of sit right on the line. Mm-hmm. Romance is very important to me. And when people have asked me, what was your kind of first ship? What was your OTP? What's the couple you kind of imprinted on that made you want to, do this? It's Han and Leia. It's still Han and Leia. And I think that relationship in the original trilogy was so beautifully done, especially for a 12-year-old with awakening hormones. And so I always kind of think back to that and what I liked about it and how some of the Star Wars novelizations kind of expanded it. And I think in this, it's sort of the reminder that, in romance, especially if you're writing a romance where it doesn't necessarily have a ton of external factors or external conflicts. My superhero novels do have a lot of external conflicts because the world is always just about to end and they have to save it. And so they're always getting interrupted and, there's stuff like that. But I've also written contemporary where it's our world and it's, these two people and there are external conflicts, but a lot of what you're homing in on are what are those two people feeling every step of the way. Mm-hmm. And that's something I have to remind myself a lot of when I'm writing my superheroine books is if we've maybe stepped away from the romance for a couple scenes, I'm okay, right, what are these two people feeling right in this moment? And I actually think that's a really good tool for all writers of any kind of stories. What is this character feeling in this moment? How has it progressed from the last moment? Sometimes we're so busy with the plot bits and bobs that we forget about that. Mm-hmm. And it's obviously something that I think is really what makes stories sing. At the end of the day, we don't necessarily care about all the external, bits and bobs, or this cool bit of world building I did, or, the superpowers I came up with.
Mm-hmm.
What I care about is the characters and what they're going through. So I'm sorry, someone I think is mowing the lawn outside. Can you still hear me okay?
I can hear you just fine. That's okay.
Okay, good. If you have any problems, let me know. I do have earbuds, but they fall out of my ears and it becomes distracting. Anyway, it's always like right when I get on a call that someone's like, I better mow the lawn right now. But anyway, so yeah, that was like something I definitely thought about here, because especially since we're sort of taking these events as they've occurred in the comics, sometimes from her POV, sometimes kind of an omniscient POV, sometimes Vader's POV, and now we're just in her POV. I really did think about that every step of the way. What is she feeling in this moment? Especially since what she's saying doesn't always line up with what she is feeling. So that's like kind of another layer you have to project. But yeah, romance novels, and that also helped me in thinking about like the sort of how these swoonier feelings would come through.
Mm-hmm.
There's that scene in the classroom, which is I think when she first sees Sana, and my husband and I listened to the audiobook together, and when that scene came on, he was laughing because when she sees her, it sounds like Emily's performance is so good. It sounds like her head like swivels around.
Yep.
Her voice also drops like an octave. Like it's really like, oh, okay, like that's what's happening. So that was like another thing I kind of took from romance novels and the romance that I write. And then I guess I'm not sure if it's an influence so much as just how I write, but Elizabeth told me that I was kind of her first and only choice for this, and which I really was very flattered by. And she said it was because of Heroine Complex, which is again my adult series. And those are, first person, very fast paced, very ridiculous. Like they have things like, demon cupcakes and like supernatural karaoke. And so I think that sort of first person, like snappy female protagonist vibe, and then the kind of over the top ridiculous, but still with that undercurrent of hopefully very real emotion, was kind of maybe what made her think I was good for this. So that was something that I also really tried to bring to it, was that vibe and that mood. And obviously it's a little bit different because it is someone else's character and someone else's franchise, but I still kind of wanted to preserve that idea of like, okay, this is why they wanted me specifically to do this.
Right. And you do bring that vibe, and I'm glad that you mentioned the romance thing, because honestly I think that's probably one of the aspects of Star Wars that doesn't get talked about a lot, and particularly the movies, but that I do think is so crucial to its success. I truly believe that. And you mentioned Heroine Complex, your series of novels. That's something I wanted to ask you about as well, in the sense of, in previous works, you get to invent everything from scratch, and obviously here you are taking existing IP, and obviously you get to do fun stuff with it, but there is a lot of stuff that already exists that you have to work with. So does that affect how you go through the process of writing, of plotting, of planning? How does that work for you?
Yeah, it definitely does. I mean, I've written a decent amount of IP at this point, so I feel like I was still intimidated by this because it's Star Wars. It's like the one that everyone wants and that I certainly wanted very badly. And, it's been part of my life since I was born, pretty much. So, it is like there is kind of initial intimidation factor that maybe isn't so much there with your own work, with my series. Like there is a little bit of that now, because since it is, 4 books in, there are like fans who have ideas about like, what they want, or like what they want to happen with certain characters. And then, there's like kind of the intimidation of like, I don't want to disappoint them, or like, I don't know, do something that will just like totally alienate them, or, just let them down. But it is different when it's something where you're like, well, everybody knows this IP. Like, it's sort of like a chance to let the whole world down. Like, that's,
Oh,
that's
no.
definitely intimidating. So you just kind of have to like give yourself a little breath to live with that, and then move past it, or you'll never get anything done. But generally with IP at this point, I do try to take it as, when I'm doing my initial pitch, I'll just put everything I want in there. I'll go as far as I can. I'll push whatever I want to, but still, of course, remain true to the spirit of whatever that thing is.
Mm-hmm.
And then you kind of see, because with IP is, it depends on who is protecting the license, who the licensee is, like all that stuff. Like, you don't know exactly what level of, thoughts they'll have on things. I've written for like Barbie. I've written for Barbie, and I remember one thing with Barbie was they were like, Barbie does not use slang. Like, she doesn't use modern slang. Mm-hmm. And you're like, oh, okay, interesting, right? Because they don't want to, date this story for like whatever time it's in. Like, Barbie should be timeless in a way. Like, that's totally understandable. But then it does kind of present this challenge where you're like, so how do you make her talk so she still sounds kind of fresh and modern, but it's not in a way that instantly dates it? It's sort of this like thing you have to find. And then you kind of go back and forth, and you see like how much they'll let you push certain things and all of that. So with this, I've never done Star Wars before. I didn't really know, but they actually did give me a lot of freedom to interpret the story and to kind of like tell it the way I wanted to. And I don't think there was anything that was like, no, this is a problem. I think the only thing was like, when there's a step in this process where they do like a deep lore check, which I appreciate, because I feel like I know a lot, but obviously this is something, this particular IP is so large and complicated and has had so many people adding to it over the years. Like, there are certainly things that I do not know. And so like, I think one of the only things was they were like, oh yeah, you can't mention porgs, because I had like a reference to porgs, and they're like, they don't, at this point, like, not enough people know about porgs. Like, the planet is so isolated, they haven't like gotten out yet. Like, the people necessarily know what those are enough to make this kind of casual, jokey reference. Mm-hmm. And I was like, oh, okay. So then it became this funny thing where we were trying to think of like a creature that was like still cute, but continuity appropriate or timeline appropriate. So in terms of this particular story, it was mostly things like that. There weren't any things that were like given to me that were like, absolutely do not do this, or, you absolutely cannot do this. Like, they were actually really open to kind of what my interpretation of this was. And since a lot of the story beats were already laid out, they did want to know, like I said before, like, what new things are you adding? What are the kind of new elements? What are maybe some of the new scenes before I started writing? But I didn't really feel like restricted in any way. I actually felt like, at least with this project, that we had a good deal of freedom to kind of interpret it the way that we wanted to, and it was really fun. But yeah, I think writing IP every time, I think, is a little bit of a different experience, and you're just kind of figuring out, I guess, if if it's like the sandbox metaphor, you're playing in someone else's sandbox, you're figuring out, where the little guardrails are, like how much you can push up against them, and what's sort of still in line with what that universe is.
Right. And so for the stuff that you did create that was new, that wasn't solely from the source material, was there anything that particularly surprised you, like characters behaving in certain ways, sort of unexpected inspirations that you had as you were going through the process?
I think one was that I got to write that scene with Boba Fett, and that was actually like that was an Elizabeth suggestion. She had like so many good ideas, and that was one where she was like, I can't remember how it originally was, but it was sort of like, Vader has been away from the ship, and then he comes back, and Aphra's like, oh, there's a message from the bounty hunter Boba Fett, and he has this information, he wants to talk to you. And so I think Elizabeth was like, hey, this seems to indicate that there was maybe an exchange between Aphra and Boba Fett, and that might be like a really cool scene that we could see now or hear now, because it's not in the comics. And I was like, oh, okay. So like that was something I wasn't expecting. Like, I like Boba Fett. I'm not one of the sort of Boba Fett like super fans.
Okay.
So it wasn't like I was like, oh, I have to write a scene with Boba Fett. But I was still like, oh, that's pretty cool. I'm going to write a scene with Boba Fett. And then I think what was like sort of unexpected about that when I was writing it is like when you sort of say to yourself, now I'm going to write this scene with Boba Fett. I think I was expecting it to be like, super serious, and that like it would be like really intense and like this like game of, cat and mouse. But then, Aphra gets in there and she always like, she doesn't do what you tell her to, like no matter what, she doesn't do what you tell her to. So I feel like it was like, oh no, obviously Aphra would kind of want to take the piss out of him. Like she, she would kind of like, making fun of him, and then she keeps calling him Boba Man and, messing up his name, and he gets kind of upset about that. And so like, I guess it was unexpected to write a kind of comedic scene with Boba Fett where even the way he reacts is kind of comedic. That was definitely not something I would have ever expected to do.
He was the perfect straight man for that. Like, there was no break whatsoever, and Aphra just completely rolled all over him. It was hysterical.
Yeah.
Speaking of comedy, we've mentioned him a couple of times in the conversation. I would be remiss if I did not ask you about 000. So he obviously is a tremendous source of comedic material, and I imagine that that's really fun on the one hand, but I also imagine that there's a risk with that too, to not go too far over the top of that. Can you talk a little bit about writing for 000, because you also got the opportunity to write additional material for him as well?
Yeah, 000 is a really great character, not just because he's just at the core a great character, but also for this, because a lot of times what we were sort of having to do with things we would add to scenes that already existed was, it was like, okay, now there's like, for audio, there's maybe too long of a break, so we need a little bit more dialogue, or we need something to explain what's going on since you can't see it, you don't have the visual of the comic, or just for rhythm's sake, we need a couple more exchanges here between him and Aphra. And he was just kind of the gift that kept giving, because he always has these like horrible one-liners that are surprisingly easy to come up with. It's just like, because he's a droid of extremes. He really hates organics, and so you can just kind of riff on that forever. He has like a million things he can say that all come back to this idea that he really hates organics and thinks that droids are superior. And so that he was just a lot of fun. I think as far as like going over the top, that was something, and again, this is something that now I kind of try to do with IP, where I'll just push it as far as I can, and they'll tell me if I need to pull back, and so that's kind of what I did. Like, whenever he had to say something, it just had to be like the most horrible, like disgusting, like, he's always trying to like kill people, or let Aphra know that he wants to kill people, and how excited he would be if he got to do some murder. And so I think that was just fun. I never felt like he was going too far, because I feel like he's a character where there's kind of not a way to go too far. Like, all of the things he's already said that are already in canon are so horrible. There's really, I don't think there's really a way to like top that. And I think the challenge is just making sure that he's not kind of repeating himself too much. It's sort of like, I've also gotten to write Clueless, for the comic book that was like a continuation of the movie Clueless. And with that, like the sort of like the way that those characters say things is so key to what that IP is, right? To what that movie is. The language is like almost another character. And so, I wrote that with my friend Amber Benson, and we kept saying like, okay, like we can't just end every page with her saying as if, because then it becomes this sort of, weird cliche that you're just falling back on even though it's something she says. And so with 000, it was like, okay, like how many times can he call people meat bags? Like how many times can he say like, I think the alt for that was, I was like, how about blood-filled flat sacks of flesh or something like that? And it sounds so gross. And I think I even put a comment in where I was like, if this is too disgusting, we can make it something else. But they were like, no, cool. No, that's something he would totally say. So with him, I think it's just like mixing up the terms he uses to be his murderous self that is maybe the challenge.
Well, that is awesome. I love this. Sarah, I'm so grateful to you for taking the time out of your day to have the conversation with me and for you to share all this awesome stuff with our listeners and viewers. For anybody who wants to learn more about you and your work and what you might be up to coming up next, whether it's Star Wars or whether it's your own stuff, where should people follow you? Where should people discover more about you online?
Yes, thank you, and thanks for having me. And I feel like we would be remiss if we didn't also mention that 000 is voiced by Sean Keenan, who is very amazing. Mm-hmm. And I know he and Nick Martorelli, the producer, worked really hard to like come up with that voice, because it was such an anticipated voice. And I think like we were like, does he sound just like Anthony Daniels, or is it like a little bit different, or like is his voice deeper? Like, what is it? And I felt what they came up with and what Sean did was like really perfect. And I'm so happy to see people like taking note of that. So I just wanted to mention him since we talked about 000. But you can find me online. I'm on Twitter a lot. It's just Sarah Kuhn. It's my name. On Instagram, I'm Sarah Kuhn Books. And my website, which probably needs to be updated, is heroinecomplex.com. That's heroin like superheroine, not like the drug. It's the title of my first book. Those are where you can usually find me.
Awesome. And I will link to all of those in the show notes as well, so everybody can find them readily. Sarah, thank you so much for the time. Thank you for the insights. Thank you for the laughs. I really appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
And there you go. That is my conversation with Sarah Kuhn, the author of the Doctor Aphra audio drama, also the Heroin Complex novels, and a host of other projects. So check her out. Again, Twitter is Sarah Kuhn, Kuhn, and heroincomplex.com for her website. One last note is to say thank you to our friends at Audible, and I hope you will check out sw7x7.com/audible for a free trial and a free audiobook download, which could well be the Doctor Aphra audio drama, but there are also a whole host of Star Wars items to check out there, and non-Star Wars items, because, you can't live by Star Wars alone. Seems crazy to say, but it is true. Anyway, again, sw7x7.com/audible for your free 30-day trial and free audiobook download. And that's going to do it for the show today. Thank you so much for joining me for it, as always, and may the Force be with you wherever in the world you may be.
Star Wars 7x7 is not endorsed or sponsored yet by Lucasfilm Limited, Disney, or 20th Century Fox, and is intended for entertainment and information purposes only. Star Wars, the Star Wars logo, all names and pictures of Star Wars characters, vehicles, and any other Star Wars-related items are registered trademarks and/or copyrights of Lucasfilm Limited or their respective trademark and copyright holders. May the Force be with them. All original content is copyright 2020 by Star Wars 7x7. We hope you love it.